The night the ocean spoke. They never said tap, not on Halibut, not out loud. It was the package, the can, the hardware. On the chart it lived as a pencil cross, then nothing, just water. Then steel met silt. USS Halibut eased down on her skegs, welded skis bolted to a spy so she could sit on the bottom without advertising it. Pumps rode shock mounts. Footsteps learned rubber. The captain whispered orders like sound could climb steel and report to Petropavlovsk. Up there, officers drank tea and used a shore cable they believed physics protected. Down here, a diver in a red washlight hugged 6 tons of steel built to call them liars. First jaw, then second. Hands remembering a drill the brain tried to forget. No splice, no cut, just magnetism. The 6-ton induction pod wrapped the cable like a careful thief and listened by physics, tickling the cable's field through insulation, drawing a ghost of current from a wire that never felt a wound. He paused, not for drama, for pressure, the way your ribs argue after too long in cold water. A small red lamp winked once. He breathed once, twice, and pushed away. Above, the boat became a lung that refused to exhale. A petty officer mouthed counts instead of speaking. 1, 2, 3, time sliced thin, so you didn't think about patrols overhead or nets that could snag a periscope like a finger through a loop. The plan was drawn in rooms with no windows. Approach in eddies. Ride the backside of a thermocline. Park where the seabed turned firm. Those skegs weren't decoration. They were legs, letting 5,000 tons of submarine rest without thrashing water into gossip. Get this, nobody wanted heroics. The trick wasn't planting the pod. It was never having been there at all. That meant route planning like choreography. They rehearsed cable logic the way a conductor studies tempo. Cables hate rock and trenches. They love gentle slopes, stable sediment, geology that doesn't grind a sheath into confession. Halibut's navigator ran fingers along isobaths and asked, what does a hurried Soviet surveyor do with a barge in bad weather and a schedule to keep? That answer built the path. The diver came back in slow, body heat traded for a blanket and a joke that didn't land. The compartment smelled like metal and coffee. Someone grinned at the tiny lamp as if it were a newborn. Nobody clapped. The captain rubbed the bridge of his nose. We're late, he said, though they were. Late was a word to keep a heart from sprinting. They lifted off the bottom like a prayer you say in your head, not your mouth. Here's the human side of an invisible theft. The first haul didn't sing, it stacked. Strips, tapes, transcriptions turned the Sea of Okhotsk into a room. Exercise schedules, movement orders. The tone a duty officer used when maybe had to sound like sure. A junior analyst in a windowless shop wrote down a phrase that didn't match doctrine, quietly thrilled and a little sick at the power of knowing a secret at its source. On boats and bases, nothing changed. That was the point. If the cable didn't feel a wound, why encrypt? Why suspect? Halibut learned a rhythm, approach windows, storage swaps, battery cycles. Divers treated silence like a schedule. The pod wasn't a trophy, it was a timepiece, and the ocean kept its own calendar. Crews measured themselves against that metronome. A fixer greased a latch because it squeaked on a Tuesday swell. A radio man taped don'ts under his console. Don't overtransmit, don't trust luck, don't talk about the can. While steel kissed Pacific floor, the map upstairs got cleaner. Cable finding turned into craft. Sonar stopped being sound and started being stories. A faint line that wasn't sand ripple, a slope that suggested a barge ladder once scraped by. Halibut's skegs kissed the same patch, so often the silt learned their outline. It sounds romantic. It was. It was minutes measured by how long you could go without breathing wrong. They rotated crews like a sacrament. Fresh hands learned to move slow, veterans learned to say less. A chief told a kid, if you're about to be proud, stop. The kid laughed, then didn't. Pride lives loud. This mission liked quiet. Risk threaded everything. A fishing trawler cut a safe lane without meaning to. A patrol sub hummed overhead for 5 minutes too long. A seal bumped metal and made 3 men flinch. Mammals don't file flight plans. The captain carried a choice in his pocket every second. Break off and go, or trust the schedule. He chose trust because that's how you finish things worth doing. Then the ocean spoke. Not thunder, paper, stacks that made Okhotsk a conference room. The brief didn't sing, it listed. Names, dates, timings. Someone underlined a habit twice and circled a change once. The underlines built confidence. The circle built appetite. Nobody knew time had become a third player. Every lamp that blinked on a can started a clock in a stranger's kitchen far away, in a city where debts grew teeth. But on this night, in red light and rubber, the ocean gave up a first sentence. The boat rose. The captain finally exhaled. Somewhere up that copper, a message went out like any other day. And for the first time, it didn't belong to the people who sent it. Finding the needle, how they found the cable. Finding a Soviet cable in an ocean the size of a continent wasn't luck. It was behavior. You start with scraps, dockside rumors about a barge that never fished, a Soviet temporary exclusion zone winked into notices, a maintenance tender that always refueled on Thursdays, and you stitch a guess that can live underwater. The guess has to pass physics. Cables don't like mountains. They prefer gentle slopes, stable sediment, seabeds that won't grind a sheath into confession. Think like a surveyor with a deadline, and you can think like a cable. The crew learned to read seafloor the way aviators read weather. Isobaths became handwriting. A smooth contour near a military harbor wasn't pretty, it was policy grouted into geology. A young navigator tapped a pencil on a chart. If I had a barge and a boss, I'd drop here. The captain didn't smile. He shifted the plot 2 miles south. The boss is late. The swell's wrong. You hug the lee. That was the path Halibut took. Halibut's skegs made belief practical. Without them, she'd hover and fuss, announcing herself with microstorms in sand. With them, she settled. 4 steel fins, welded like legs onto a fish that learned to crawl, let her park without telling the ocean she was there. Each landing rehearsed silence. Trim valves hissed through filters. Pumps floated on shock mounts. Human feet learned rubber like religion. When she kissed the bottom, the silt didn't argue. Sonar was the second religion. Not Hollywood ping, side scan blur, faint ridges, patterns nature doesn't write. An operator traced a ghost line across a waterfall of dots and said nothing. 2 hours and 3 passes later, that repeat isn't sand. Sand forgets. Cables remember being laid. A bite in the bathymetry that bent the wrong way hinted at a barge ladder once dragged. That scar set bearings. Up where maps breathe air, analysts built scaffolding. The cable had to tie Petropavlovsk to Vladivostok, a straight line that wasn't straight because politics bends to geology. Fishing charts, hydrographic surveys, dredging notices, grid built. A tiny red flag pinned on a curtainless wall. Start here, she said, not because she knew, but because the math did. Micro stories mattered. A watchstander circled a smudge that held steady despite tide predictions. He marked it with a question mark because the ocean punishes certainty. A week later, a second smudge kissed the first from a different bearing. 2 coincidences make a plan. The chief looked once and wrote, "Run," in the margin. Get this, cable logic is human logic wearing a wetsuit. Soviet barge crews avoided rocks because nobody wants to write reports. They hugged contours because fuel gets counted by men who shout. They staged near warm food and watch officers who loved routine. The cable took the path of least paperwork. Halibut's navigator traced that path with a finger that had learned bureaucracy through water. Finding the needle meant not being the magnet. That's where skegs and choreography earn pay. Approach on the dark side of a thermal layer where sound curves away from curious ears. Slow ahead wasn't slow. It was breath held for minutes that felt like hours. The pilot watched the depth gauge like a cardiologist. A hair low, and the keel writes its own story in silk. A hair high, and propwash gossips. He threaded between hairs. Divers didn't go until the boat earned quiet. Red light and a hand signal carry more authority than a shout when the wrong ears might be listening. First run laid whispers. A pebble here, a tiny grapnel there. When those markers reappeared on the second and third pass, confidence moved from maybe to yes. Announcements are for after-action reports. This game prefers nods. The best clue didn't come from the sea. It came from paper nobody should have seen. A Soviet tender's maintenance schedule listed line checks on intervals that made no sense for valves. Lines meant cables. The dates matched weather windows that turn aqua into asphalt. Overlay with bathymetry and 3 zones glowed. Halibut visited all 3. Only one felt like intent turned to metal. Once they thought they had it, they did the opposite of celebrate. They waited. Currents shift. Sand wanders. A real cable shows up the same way in bad moods and good. The second pass saw it. The third proved it. The fourth was for humility. Then the captain said, "Work," and routine became theft. The crew's lesson became doctrine in rooms they'd never see. You don't find secrets by chasing them. You find habits that can only exist if secrets are nearby. Cables avoid pain. Men avoid paperwork. Water avoids angles. Put those together and a needle starts to float. Halibut eased off her skegs like a cat leaving a warm spot. The chart gained a line that wasn't ink. Somewhere above, a Soviet duty officer yawned and stamped a form. Below, a sonar tech scratched a new tick mark under his console where nobody would see it. He didn't believe in luck. He believed in behavior. That's how they found the cable. The induction pod, listening without touching. They called it a pod because calling it a miracle makes people reckless. 6 tons of engineered nerve, 2 jaws lined with copper coils, edges radiused so a gloved hand could find them blind. It didn't bite the cable, it hugged it. The jaws closed until steel met certainty. Inside, the machine did the rude conversion, turning whispers into voltages, but the real trick lived in physics. No splice, no cut. Magnetic induction, a coil sensing the cable's alternating field through armor and insulation that never felt a wound. The cable kept its skin. The pod took its soul. Here's the science without the show. A Soviet shore station drove current down copper. That current threw off a tiny, predictable magnetic field. Wrap a coil around the cable, careful, aligned, tight, and Faraday does the theft for you. The coil listens to the field, inducing a corresponding voltage. Modulations riding that current, voices, teleprinter clicks, routing tags, become waveforms on your tape without a single molecule of their jacket disturbed. Physics as skeleton key, confidence as lock. And here's how it lived down there. Batteries like discipline, not bravado. Power cycles set by a clock that didn't care about weather. Recorders spun, heads tracing tracks designed to forgive salt and pressure. A tiny brain, crude now, viciously clever then, woke and slept on a schedule that matched shore office habits. You don't over-record chatter, you match it. The pod learned their routine the way a pickpocket learns cadence in a crowded street. Every retrieval was a dance you did without looking at your feet. Halibut parked on her skegs, took her breath, and sent down hands that had done this enough to hate it properly. Unlatch, tilt, slide the storage like you'd practiced dry 100 times, then forget the drill because the ocean never rehearses. Swap tape packs, check seals that had never betrayed you, not because they couldn't, but because fear keeps O-rings honest. Reattach, recheck the lamp. Leave quiet enough that the silt keeps its gossip. Risk stacked like coins in a jar you didn't want to count. Flooding, one bad gasket and months of voices drown in mud. Interference. The sea throws tantrums at low frequencies, and machinery hums turn to fog if you don't isolate power like a monk. Discovery. The Soviets didn't encrypt because they believed physics was armor. That belief was your cover and your curse. So you built countermeasures into silence, non-magnetic skins, edges that looked like seafloor, screws clocked so they didn't sing. The pod wore the seabed's accent. Get this, the magic wasn't just taking the sound. It was knowing when not to. You don't record for hero reels. You record for rooms where people drink bad coffee and change budgets with pencils. So the pod woke when shore offices woke, napped during lulls that matched lunch hours and midnight resets. Induced signal came cleaner when you respected human frailty. Physics helped. Anthropology finished the job. Meanwhile, the crew upstairs treated time like a living thing. Retrieval cadence became doctrine. You don't hit a spot on the same day each cycle. You drift just enough to be uninteresting. Storage swaps never at dawn twice in a row. Battery changes masked inside where the Windows barge captains used for their own sins. The pod's hunger for fresh tape taught you to say no. It always wanted one more pass. You taught it patience. Engineers fought the sea without dramatics. Electronics wrapped in desiccants. Drains designed to assume seals fail. Connectors chosen as if betrayal were a feature. One tech swore by a resin because it behaved like a gentleman under pressure. Another kept a tally of near failures in pencil nobody found because he burned the page when he shipped out. Longevity owed as much to superstition as spec sheets. Physics kept paying. A cable insulated against the ocean isn't insulated against the world. No cut meant no cause. That mistake kept them naked. A note somebody in Petropavlovsk would never love. Induced voltage draws stories out of copper the way a magnet raises filings from a desk. You don't have to touch a thing to change its history. Human rhythm threaded through steel. Divers counted heartbeats to measure calm. On deck, a chief carried the schedule in his jawline. He'd look at the sea and decide if the pod would forgive. If the ocean felt bulky, he'd call it. If it felt thin, he'd wait. Waiting is a weapon and a debt. There were scares. A pod came up with a sheen of something that shouldn't be there. A lamp flickered twice when it only ever winked once. An inspection found nothing wrong and everything at stake. Each scare tightened the ritual. Grease here, talk there, write off Providence and keep the checklist. Result, months of unguarded doctrine captured by a machine that never raised its voice. Strategy memos breathed on that cable. Exercise plans walked across it every Tuesday. Duty officers repeated phrases that revealed habit-wearing command. The pod took it all and told nobody until the tapes spun behind doors with no windows. And under that certainty, a brittle truth waited. The tap worked because they believed insulation was faith. The schedule worked because you believed patience was armor. Somewhere far from the water, a man with $65,000 in debt and an alias thought context wouldn't bleed. That's the part the pod couldn't hear. The footsteps of a betrayal walking toward it on dry land. The first cans came up looking like any other hardware. Salt film on edges, O-rings behaving, labels in a careful hand. Engineers wiped, signed, and slid them through doors where chatter died.